Hello and welcome to our very first live Zoom meetup for the Lift Project. We are so excited for this new initiative and we're so excited that you could be here to join us or to be watching the replay. My name's Mandy and I'm the Education Specialist for the Lift Project. We started up this initiative because the feedback we kept getting from people was that they loved the Lift Project, but once they had finished it, there was this sense of what now? What next? So we wanted to provide this opportunity to keep the discussions going and to provide another point of connection and reflection. We wanted to continue to support you on your well-being journey. Our meetups will happen once a month on the first Wednesday of every month. You'll be able to find the link to any future meetings in the course page on your Lift Project login. You'll also be able to find recordings of any previous meetups if you haven't been able to attend live. We've also just launched a new podcast, and there are 2 episodes of that are now available. There'll be about 2 coming up every month, and they involve Darren and also psychologist Simon Matthews discussing some of the latest ideas, research, and other tips involving well-being. They will also be up on YouTube, and you can find them on Spotify as well. We're also really excited to start being a lot more active on social media. So you can also find the Lift Project on Instagram and Facebook, where you'll find little snippets and little bits and pieces posted to also help you along with your well-being journey. Once again, thank you so much for joining us and being a part of this. On each of our Zoom meetups, Darren is going to share a thought, and then we will have a time for reflection and discussion. So I'm going to hand over to Darren for his thought.
All right, so I want to go back, many years now. I hate to say it, but this is when I was a university student. I have this very vivid memory of a particular lecturer, so one of our professors, who was the craziest professor that we had. Now, professors are always a little bit crazy, and I include myself in those ranks, but this particular one was our psychology lecturer. So rather ironic that, the craziest of all of my lecturers was a psychologist. But anyway, I remember this particular time we were in this lecture hall, and there was the stadium, all the seats went up to, up to the high area at the end, and there were a couple of doors with some stairs that came down from the back of it, and then there was some exits at the front as well. And one of my friends was I was studying to be a PE teacher, physical education teacher, and one of my friends was the head of the PE society. And so he thought, it was about 5 minutes before the lecture commenced and the professor hadn't arrived yet. And so he thought, I'll just get up and make a couple of quick announcements. So he stood up in front of the lecture hall and he said, hey, everyone, just a couple of announcements. We've got a social event coming up. And that's about as far as he got when this psychologist professor entered from the back of the stadium. And I'm not quite sure what went through his mind when he saw this full stadium with a person standing at the front, but obviously he thought something untoward was going on. And so all of a sudden, we just hear, hey, this scream from the back of the lecture theatre. And everyone turns back and they see this professor standing there with his notes. And then he turns to my friend, who I can say, he's actually had the same name as me. Anyway, he points to this my friend down standing at the front there and says, hey, he says, who do you think you are? Like this. Now, maybe he thought my friend was, having a joke at his expense or whatever. But it was very, very benign, I can assure you. But anyway, my friend, being the quick-witted individual that he was, looked up at the professor, and when he asked him, who do you think you are? He said, Bond. James Bond. Like this. Well, this didn't go over so well. The professor all of a sudden just threw his notes onto the ground and then started sprinting down the stairs towards my friend. My friend thought, well, this looks like a great time to exit. So he looked at the crowd, he gave us a wave, and then he was out through one of the front entry doors of this lecture stadium. And the professor chased him, and then for the next 10 minutes, we all sat on in wide-eyed wonder as to what was going on here. Eventually, the professor did return, hot and sweaty, and allegedly he never actually caught up with my friend, but my friend just kept him running and gave him that sense of hope that he might. Anyway, it was a dramatic event, but I always come back to that one question that that psychology professor asks, and that is, who do you think you are? You know, really what he's asking, well, in that context, but this is a really valuable question to ask ourselves, you know, who do we think we are? You know, and really what we're referring to is this sense of identity. You know, where do we get this sense of identity from? And it's quite interesting what the research indicates in this space. You see, we tend to derive our sense of identity, our sense of self-worth and sense of value from different places. For some of us, it's actually through our body image. And body image, we actually know, plays a really big part in shaping how we see ourselves, who we think we are. And you can see I've done a little bit of photoshopping here, just in case you couldn't tell. Look at you thinking, wait a second, that doesn't look quite right. Well, for some of us, we definitely know that body image is a big determinant. For others, they derive this sense of, you know, how they see themselves, their sense of identity and self-worth through their sporting prowess. And for those who know me, know that this isn't me. I can hardly touch the nets. And even when I was a younger fellow, let alone nowadays. But certainly we know that things like, you know, people's physical appearance, their sporting prowess, these all play into our sense of identity. For some of it, it's our fashion sense. And we know that the things that we have, whether it's that sporty motorbike and the leather jacket or the tie, you know, these things can play into how we see ourselves, our sense of identity. And I dug out this photo here, which is rather, well, not rather, a lot embarrassing. If you can actually get the full effect what I'm wearing here, this is me as a kid. My mum dressed me like this. Thanks, Mum. It's taken me years to move on from this, but that's actually a purple velvet suit, believe it or not. Anyway, and look at these ruffles. And if you actually zone out, it's actually, I've got shorts on. They're not just, it's not a full suit. These are shorts, purple velvet shorts. Anyway, no wonder, you know, I've got some challenges. But anyway, so we know that people's dress sense, you know, their sense of fashion, the things that they own can play a big part into how people see themselves, who they think they are, and their sense of identity. But it's also, for some people, it's the people we associate with. And once again, a little bit of photoshopping going on there, but the people we connect with, we know can have a big impact on how we see ourselves and how we value ourselves. And sometimes it's the groups that we hang out with. And some of the groups that we hang out with can be really not so great for us. And as parents, I've got 3 teenage kids now. Well, actually, one of them is not even a teenager anymore. She's 21. But, you know, we worry about the people that we associate with because it does shape how we see ourselves and our sense of worth. While some groups are not so great, some can be really uplifting. And so, you know, obviously it's an ideal thing to hang around in those sorts of settings. But here's my question to you. You know, as asked by that professor friend or that professor psychologist back in the day, who do you think you are? You know, how do you see yourself? And what I want to introduce is this idea. We know from a well-being perspective, you know, that these things that we sort of we use to forge our sense of identity and self-worth can have a tremendous impact on our well-being. But here's the problem. The groups of people we hang out with can change. You know, our fashion sense can change. Our sporting prowess can change. Our body image can change as we get older. These things are very labile. And, you know, as we all know, all of us grow old and lose our good looks. Now, I asked my team, I said, I need a photo to represent this, you know, to illustrate this point. And this is what they came up with. And I said, but that's just a photo of me today. So anyway, there's something in that. Actually, I had one of my mates, because I mentioned my daughter just turned 21. And one of my good friends said to her, in my hearing, he said, hey, Liv, he says, you've turned out amazing. He said, you certainly got your dad's good looks. And I thought, oh, that's really nice for your mate to say something like that. And then he finished with, and your mum got to keep hers. So anyway, so here's this thing that, you know, how do we see ourselves? Who do we think we are? We definitely know that can shape our well-being in a really profound way. And I want you to introduce, I've got studies that sort of really jump out at me when I read about them. And this one was one of those. It was the Kauai Longitudinal Study. And what happened here, it was an island in Hawaii, one of the Hawaiian Islands, very disadvantaged community where there is a whole lot of sort of adverse childhood experiences that the young people are brought up in that environment. And so the study actually kicked off in 1955. What the researchers from the University of California decided to do is to study the life trajectory of all of the kids that were born on that island in that year. And there were 700 kids. And what they found, fascinatingly enough, is that about a third of the kids actually turned out to be really quite confident, caring, competent, contributing members of their society. And the researchers were fascinated. Well, what is it that allowed these people, these young kids, right, that were immersed in this, not so conducive to well-being and life success environment, what allowed them to rise above it? And this is the conclusion of their 40-year study. They said this. He said these youngsters were resilient. And these resilient youngsters all had, get this, a healthy identity. How they saw themselves. It was positive. And how did that come about for them? Well, it actually wasn't about the things they had, their fashion sense, their body image, any of that stuff. What they had was at least one person in their lives who accepted them unconditionally. And the quote actually goes on to say, regardless of their physical attractiveness, their temperamental idiosyncrasies, right, because we all screw up at times, and regardless of their intelligence. So regardless of all that stuff, they just had someone in their life say, you know what? You are valuable, you are, of importance because you are you. And all that external stuff is just periphery to that. Here's a photo of my middle child. This is Lige. He's actually a lot taller than me now. But this was when he was a little tacker, and I remember this so vividly. And I say this with some, it's some shame, because it's actually an indicator of how slow a learner I am. But we used to play this little game. Every time I'd go and put him in bed and go to kiss him goodnight, I'd say, "Hey, Lige, Daddy loves you," and he'd go, "Why?" And I had this thing. We had this game going, and I would say something like, "Oh, because you are so good at climbing trees," or "You're so clever." And it was only after about a month of doing this little game every night that it dawned on me on how inadequate my comment was. And so I knew what I had to say the next night. And so when he actually said the same thing, I said, "Good night, Lige, Daddy loves you." And he said, "Why?" And I said, "Because you are you, and you're also mine. And there's nothing good or bad that can ever change that." You see, what we know is that if we have this innate sense of worth, not dependent upon the things that we can do or own or be given to us or any of that sort of stuff, but just this strong sense that, I am me, you are you. And because of that, you have value. You are a person of value. We know that that just changes everything. It can have tremendous impact on people's well-being trajectory well into late in their life. And so that's the thought I want to share with you today, that identity. Where do you get your sense of identity from, right? And do you, as I know to be true, do you value yourself because you are you? I'd love for that to be the case. And certainly one thing we'll be reminding you of every time we have these group meetups, we'll start off with an acknowledgement that you are a person of value. And next month, I'll be touching on what you can do with that. But for now, we have some reflection questions, and this is what we'd love you to give consideration to. So we're going to have an opportunity to break up into some groups. But here are the 3 reflection questions that we'd love you to just spend about 15 minutes chatting about, or really about 10 minutes. So the first one is that, understanding that our value as individuals isn't tied up to external circumstances, such as our abilities and our possessions, can have a significant benefit for our overall well-being. So how might this awareness influence our sense of self-worth and happiness? So there's one thing to chat about. Second one, that study that I referred to, that Kauai Longitudinal Study, found that a healthy identity is forged by having unconditional acceptance. And I'm wondering, is there someone that you've actually experienced that from in your life? And if so, you might like to share that. And then the last one, I always want to give you some sort of actionable challenge to try. And my question for you, and I'd love you to reflect on this, who is one person that you have access to, that you could be that unconditional acceptance to, and extend that to, because that could change the trajectory of their life.